They say the mountains don't keep secrets. They just whisper them differently to those who dare to listen. Um, I learned that the hard way, one freezing November morning on Roan Mountain, when the forest reminded me that silence can be louder than any scream. My name's Daniel. I'm 39 years old, and I've been camping most of my life. I've hiked the Smokies, slept in the Pisgah, and watched the fog roll like ghost breath across the Blue Ridge peaks. But that night, I realized something I'd never understood before. Sometimes it's not what you hear that scares you. It's what you can't explain once the sound is gone. I'd rented a small cabin, one of those old timber structures that look charming on travel sites but feel entirely different once the sun dips behind the ridge. The owner, a wiry man in his 60s named Clyde, met me at the gravel turnoff just before dusk. He had that look people get from spending too many years in the high country, weathered, eyes sharp like he could read the tree line for trouble. "She creaks a bit," he said, handing me the key. "Wind rolls through the holler funny at night. Don't pay it no mind." He hesitated, then added, "Lock the windows, always. Cold comes from more than the wind up here." I smiled, assuming it was just mountain superstition. Locals in the Appalachians love their stories. Shadow walkers, ghost lights, echoes that repeat what you never said. But I wasn't here for ghost stories. I'd come to clear my head after a breakup, to sit in solitude, to hear the world breathe without the constant noise of people. I unloaded my pack, lit the old iron stove, and settled in with my journal and a thermos of coffee. The night fell faster than expected, heavy and complete, like a curtain drawn over everything I thought I knew about darkness. By midnight, the wind began to hum through the trees, low and rhythmic, like something calling from deep inside the forest. The fire popped in the stove, a soft heartbeat in the silence. I was writing when I noticed the window nearest the bed fogging from the inside. My breath caught. I hadn't been near it. I watched as the fog thickened, like someone was standing right there, breathing against the glass. I stood, half expecting to see my reflection move. But it didn't. The silhouette that looked back wasn't mine. It was shorter, shoulders hunched like a child. I blinked hard, and the shape dissolved into the condensation. I told myself it was nothing. Tricks of light, the mind's way of finding faces where there aren't any. I cracked the window slightly, letting the cold air slice in. Then I heard it. A soft tapping, deliberate and uneven, from the far side of the cabin. It wasn't a branch. It was too rhythmic, too human. I stepped outside, flashlight trembling slightly in my grip. The woods were still, too still. Even the crickets had gone silent. The beam cut through mist and caught the glint of frost on the grass, but nothing moved. And yet that feeling, the kind that curls up from your stomach to your throat, told me I wasn't alone. When I came back inside, I saw something that made me stop mid-step. The fogged window was clean now, no condensation, no mark, except for a small smear on the inside of the glass. It looked like a fingerprint dragged downward, thin and distinct. I rubbed it with my sleeve, but it didn't come off. My pulse quickened. I backed away, sat by the fire, and told myself again that I was tired. The mountain plays tricks on your perception. The wind moans through hollow logs, and the cold finds its way into your imagination. By 2 a.m., the temperature had dropped below freezing. The fire had dimmed to embers, so I tossed in more wood. That's when I heard the sound again. Not tapping this time, but a scraping. Inside. It came from the corner near the door, slow and deliberate, like fingernails against old pine. I froze. Every sound in the world vanished except that one. I picked up the flashlight again and turned it on the corner. Nothing. Just the rough boards, the same cabin smell of smoke and damp wool. I was shaking now, half from fear, half from disbelief. My mind raced through explanations. Animal, draft, imagination. But then, at 4:27 a.m., everything shattered. Literally. The window beside the bed exploded inward, not outward, from the inside of the cabin. Glass sprayed across the room. I hit the floor, covering my head. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the roar of my heartbeat and the whisper of wind rushing through the broken pane. I lifted my head slowly, terrified to see what I might find. Nothing moved. The cabin was still. The fire flickered weakly. its light catching on a single fragment of glass lodged in the floorboard, glinting red from the flame. I forced myself to stand. The inside of the window frame was splintered outward, as if something had pushed through from within. That made no sense. I'd been sitting in plain view. No one could have been inside without me seeing. I checked every inch of the cabin, the closet, under the bed, even behind the old stove. Nothing. Just me. And yet the air felt charged, electric, like the room itself was holding its breath. I stepped outside again, barefoot in the frost, just needing air, needing reality to make sense again. The mountain lay silent under the moon, silver mist curling along the ridge. But there, near the tree line, I saw footprints in the frost. Small, bare, leading away from the cabin and vanishing into the woods. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on the porch steps until dawn, wrapped in a blanket, watching the woods for movement. When the sun finally broke over the ridge, everything looked normal again, the kind of normal that makes you question your sanity. I packed my things, locked the cabin door, and drove straight back to Clyde's place. He was already on his porch, sipping coffee like he'd been waiting. I told him what happened, voice shaking, showing him photos of the shattered glass. He listened quietly, eyes narrowing at the mention of the footprints. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said, "That cabin used to belong to a family up there, mother and daughter, winter of 79. They got snowed in. Searchers found the place a week later. Windows were smashed from the inside, just like you said. Nobody ever figured out why." He looked at me, expression unreadable. Sometimes the mountain remembers things we'd rather forget. That's why I told you to lock the windows. Cold comes from more than wind. I left that morning without looking back. But the thing is, I can't forget the feeling of that night. The heaviness in the air, the sense that something unseen was standing just beyond the firelight, watching. It wasn't just fear, it was awareness. The mountain wasn't trying to hurt me. It was showing me something, reminding me that out here, we are guests and the past never really leaves. Every trail, every cabin, every stone in these woods carries a memory. Some are beautiful, some are broken. That night taught me to respect silence, to pay attention to what the wind carries, to understand that not every echo deserves an answer. We go into the wilderness searching for peace, for solitude, but sometimes solitude has its own ghosts. Roan Mountain isn't haunted by monsters. It's haunted by memory, by the weight of what people leave behind when the cold closes in and there's nowhere else to go. And when you camp out there, when you sit alone in the stillness, you'll feel it too. The heartbeat of the mountain under your feet, the faint breath against your window at night, reminding you that you're never truly alone. And maybe that's not a warning. Maybe it's a lesson. The mountain gives, and the mountain keeps. But if you listen, really listen, you'll hear the truth whispered through the trees. That fear is not the enemy of those who wander out here. Forgetting respect is. As I drove down the winding road from Roan Mountain that morning, the frost still clinging to the grass, the world looked deceptively calm. Sunlight filtered through the trees, catching the mist as it lifted from the hollows, painting everything gold. It was hard to believe that just a few hours earlier, that same mountain had felt like it was alive, breathing, watching, remembering. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, not from fear anymore, but from the strange calm that follows it, that hollow quiet when you realize something has shifted inside you, and you'll never see the world quite the same way again. I stopped at a turnout halfway down the ridge, a spot where you could see the valley stretch out for miles. Below me, the forest rolled in waves of green and blue, endless and ancient. I sat there for a long while, engine off, the silence pressing close again. But this time it wasn't threatening. It was heavy, yes, but full. Full of meaning I couldn't yet put into words. I thought about what Clyde had said, about the mother and daughter, about windows breaking from the inside. I thought about how grief can echo through time like wind through a canyon, how fear doesn't always come from danger. Sometimes it's born from remembering what we've lost. That cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was a vessel for memory, for something unfinished. Maybe the mountain didn't want me there to scare me. Maybe it wanted me to listen, to understand what happens when you ignore the stories that live beneath the surface of things. Because the wilderness, the real wilderness, isn't just about survival. It's about humility. It's about learning that nature doesn't revolve around us. It never has. We're just a temporary note in its long, endless song. As I sat there, I realized how blind I'd been on all my other trips. I used to go into the woods thinking I was escaping something, the noise of life, the weight of people, the endless hum of expectation. But now I understood that maybe what I was really doing was running from myself. Out there, stripped of distractions, the woods show you who you really are. The quiet becomes a mirror, and sometimes what you see in that reflection can shake you more than any scream in the night. That night at the cabin, when the glass shattered inward, it felt like something breaking inside me too. The illusion of control, the idea that I could always explain everything. I'd spent my life trying to make sense of every shadow, every strange sound, every unknown. But standing in that cabin, barefoot in the frost, I realized that not everything is meant to be explained. Some things are meant to be felt. Some truths live in the spaces logic can't reach. As I turned the key in the ignition and started down the last stretch of the mountain, I caught sight of something in the rearview mirror. Just a shape, barely visible, a figure standing at the edge of the tree line, motionless, small, almost childlike. My breath caught. I blinked once, twice. When I looked again, it was gone, just trees swaying in the wind. But I didn't feel fear this time. I felt gratitude, a strange, quiet gratitude that whatever that presence was, real or imagined, it had reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that the world is deeper, more mysterious, and more sacred than we allow ourselves to believe. The mountain had given me a gift in its own haunting way. It stripped away my certainty, and in its place left reverence. Reverence for the unseen, for the unknown, for the stories that live between the trees. It's easy to think we're the masters of our surroundings, but out here, you learn quickly. The woods don't belong to you. You belong to them. And when you listen closely enough, they'll tell you the truth, not in words, but in whispers and shivers, in the way the wind bends the branches just so, as if pointing you towards something ancient and alive. When I finally reached the bottom of the mountain, I pulled over one last time and stepped out of the car. The air was warmer here, the frost giving way to dew. I looked back up toward the peaks, the same ones that had terrified me hours before, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not comfort, not relief, but peace. The kind that comes only after you've faced something bigger than yourself and realized it doesn't owe you an explanation. That night changed me. I still camp, still hike, still chase solitude in the wilderness, but I go with a different kind of awareness now. I don't just listen for the owls or the coyotes or the creek running beneath the ice. I listen for the mountain itself, for its pulse, its breath, its memory. I set up my tent or light my fire with respect, not routine. Because I know now that these places are alive in ways we'll never fully grasp. And every once in a while, when I'm alone by a campfire and the woods go silent all at once, when the night feels too still and the air hums with something invisible, I remember that cabin on Roan Mountain. I remember the shattered glass, the footprints in the frost, the cold that came from more than the wind. And I whisper a quiet promise to the dark, I hear you now. I'm listening. Because fear isn't just the body's way of saying you're in danger. Sometimes it's the soul's way of saying you've stepped too close to truth. The kind of truth that doesn't fit into words, only silence. And on that mountain at 4:27 a.m., I didn't just encounter something strange. I encountered the moment when fear turned into understanding, when the unknown stopped being an enemy and became a reminder that out here in the deep woods, the past still breathes and the earth still remembers. And maybe, just maybe, that's what keeps us coming back. Not to conquer the wilderness, but to remember what it's trying to tell us, that every gust of wind, every creak of wood, every shattered window is a story, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. When I finally got home, the rhythm of the city felt foreign. The hum of tires on wet pavement, the dull flicker of streetlights, the voices that filled the night but said nothing. It's strange how after you've been alone with the mountain long enough, civilization feels louder than chaos. I lay in bed that first night back, eyes open, thinking about that cabin, that sound of glass shattering in the dark. The more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't fear that haunted me. It was silence. The silence that came after. The kind that isn't empty, but full of something unnamed. And that's when it hit me. Every person who goes into the wild, every hiker, every camper, every wanderer who steps off the road and into the trees is searching for something. Some chase peace, some chase answers. Some, like me, just want to feel small again, to remember what it's like to be a part of something ancient. But the woods don't give you what you want. They give you what you need. And sometimes what you need isn't comfort. It's confrontation. That night on Roan Mountain, I didn't meet a ghost. I met the echo of everything I'd been ignoring. Grief, loneliness, the quiet things that hide behind distraction. The cabin didn't scare me because it was haunted. It scared me because it reflected something alive inside me, something that had been waiting in the dark for years, patient and unyielding. When that window shattered from the inside, it felt like a release, like whatever had been trapped behind the glass in that cabin and in me finally broke free. People like to say that fear teaches you to run, but I think fear teaches you to listen. It tells you when something's wrong, not just outside of you, but within. It forces you to stop pretending. Out there in the woods, stripped of light, stripped of comfort, you can't hide from yourself. The trees don't lie to you. The wind doesn't care about your excuses. The darkness demands honesty. And in that honesty, you find the parts of yourself that the noise of the world has buried. When I tell people about what happened, they always ask the same thing. Do you think it was real? I don't know how to answer that anymore. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. But what I do know is that it felt real, and that's what matters. Because the mountain didn't have to prove itself to me. It only had to remind me that belief is a fragile thing. Once you've seen something that logic can't explain, you start to understand that truth isn't always visible. Sometimes it lives in the cold air that brushes your neck, in the footprints that lead nowhere, in the silence after the breaking. And maybe that's the real lesson, that nature doesn't exist just for beauty or escape. It exists to humble us, to strip away our certainty, to make us remember that the earth doesn't revolve around our understanding. The woods don't need to be haunted to be sacred. They already are. Every fallen branch, every shattered window, every whisper through the trees, they all carry a kind of truth we've forgotten how to hear. So if you ever find yourself out there, deep in the mountains, far from the last echo of human light, and the night grows too still, and your fire burns low, and the forest seems to lean in close, don't run, don't panic, listen, because that's the moment the wild begins to speak. That's when the world strips away the layers and shows you what's real. The fear isn't there to chase you off, it's there to show you reverence. Roan Mountain taught me that the woods don't belong to anyone. Not the hikers, not the rangers, not the ghosts. The mountain belongs to itself. And when we step onto its trails, we borrow a moment of its time. That's all. A borrowed breath, a borrowed view, a borrowed night. The least we can do is listen to what it's trying to tell us. I still remember the way the light looked that morning, soft, golden, spilling through the mist like forgiveness. The cabin stood silent behind me, broken window catching the dawn. And in that moment, I understood something I never had before. Sometimes the breaking isn't the end. Sometimes it's how the light gets in. So wherever you camp, wherever you hike, wherever the road ends and the wilderness begins, carry that with you. Fear isn't your enemy. The unknown isn't your threat. They're both invitations, reminders that the world still has mysteries worth respecting. And when the wind howls through the holler, when your fire flickers low, when something in the dark reminds you that you're not alone, don't curse it. Whisper back, because the mountain is always listening. It was supposed to be one of those weekends where the woods swallowed all your noise, where the air carried only the sound of your own breathing and the wind sifting through trees older than memory. I remember the sky being a deep blue that morning when we drove into the Great Smoky Mountains, that strange shade of blue that looks peaceful from a distance but hides something ancient when you get closer. My name's Daniel, I'm 34, and I've camped most of my life. But that weekend, I learned that the forest doesn't always want you there. Sometimes it tolerates you, and sometimes it lets you know you've gone too far. There were 5 of us, all friends from college, scattered across states but bound by those rare weekends when we could escape the world and meet under open skies. We rented a small cabin deep off a dirt road, the kind you find after miles of gravel and silence. The locals called it the Ridge Cabin. The woman at the gas station where we filled up looked at me strangely when I mentioned it. She paused, tapped her nails against the counter, and said, "That place ain't been rented in a while." I laughed it off. I thought she meant it was remote. I wish that's all she'd meant. The cabin was small but solid, old pine walls, a rusted stove, the faint smell of damp wood. The moment we stepped inside, it felt colder than outside, the kind of cold that doesn't touch your skin but settles into your chest. On the first night, we built a fire, cooked sausages, told old stories. It felt normal, safe. But around midnight, I started hearing tapping. Faint, irregular, like something striking the outer wall from the woods. Not a woodpecker. Too deliberate. Too spaced apart. I remember looking at my friend Mark, who was staring at the same wall I was. Neither of us said a word. We brushed it off as branches in the wind, but the next morning, there were no branches anywhere near that wall. Just a single set of prints in the dirt, small, barefoot, leading out into the forest. We joked about it, nervously, pretending it didn't bother us. But it did. Deep down, I think we all knew something wasn't right. When you've been in the wilderness long enough, you start to feel when you're being watched. It's a subtle thing, like the forest holds its breath when you walk by. By the second night, the unease had grown roots. The air felt heavy. The woods outside were too quiet. No crickets, no wind, just silence that pressed against the cabin walls. We played cards by lantern light to drown out the quiet. Then the tapping returned. Not from outside this time, but from under the floorboards. 3 slow knocks. Then nothing. The kind of nothing that makes every heartbeat sound like thunder. Mark got up, crouched, and wrapped his knuckles back. Silence. Then, one answering tap. That's when the laughter stopped. Nobody wanted to admit fear, but it was there, thick in the air, gluing us to our seats. We tried to distract ourselves, turned up the music on an old portable speaker, but even that felt wrong. The sound bounced strangely in the cabin, like the walls were hollow. Around 2 a.m., we heard footsteps outside, slow, crunching the leaves. We all froze. I grabbed the lantern, walked to the window. Nothing. Just blackness. But the sound kept circling, from one side of the cabin to the other, like something was moving just beyond the light, testing our edges. We barely slept that night. When morning came, we found a smear on the front door, deep red, like someone had dragged their hand across it. We told ourselves it was rust, old paint, anything but what it looked like. But the smell said otherwise. It wasn't paint. And that's when I made the mistake of opening the back room. It was small, no bigger than a closet, and the door had been swollen shut. When I finally forced it open, I saw the words on the far wall, drawn in what looked like blood, old but not faded, "Stay where the woods end." The room smelled of iron and mold. My skin went cold. Someone behind me whispered, "That's a warning." I wanted to leave right then, but pride or stupidity made us stay. We said we'd clean it, make a joke of it, stay one more night just to prove we weren't scared. But fear doesn't work like that. It's not a switch you turn off. It grows in silence, in glances you don't exchange, in breaths you hold without realizing. That day, none of us spoke much. We went hiking to clear our heads, but even in daylight, the forest felt wrong, too still, too aware. We hiked until we found an old trail that wasn't on the map, lined with stones covered in lichen. I don't know why we followed it, maybe because it felt forbidden, and that made it interesting. The path wound down into a hollow where the trees grew denser and the light barely touched the ground. That's when we saw it, a tree with markings carved deep into its bark, symbols we didn't recognize. Beneath it, a small pile of bones, animal, maybe, but the way they were arranged, symmetrical, careful, felt intentional. We turned back fast, barely speaking. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun was setting. The woods looked different now, sharper somehow, like every shadow had edges. When night came, we barricaded the door, kept the lantern burning, but sometime past 5 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps inside, slow, dragging. I froze in my sleeping bag, too afraid to breathe. The others were still. Then I heard Mark whisper my name, but he was still lying across the room. The voice had come from the doorway. I turned my head slowly, heart pounding so loud I could hear it echo in my ears. The lantern was dim, just enough to see the outline of someone standing there. Tall, still, head tilted slightly as if listening. I blinked and it was gone. I scrambled up, shaking everyone awake, my words stumbling out. We searched the entire cabin, every corner, every shadow. Nothing. But when the light hit the far wall, the writing had changed. More words had appeared beneath the old message. In dripping red letters, "Why did you come back?" And below it, a single handprint. Fresh. We stood frozen, every one of us staring at that wall like it was alive. The words still glistened wet under the lantern's light, the smell of iron thick in the air. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears, could hear Sarah whisper, "It's fresh." No one wanted to move closer, but I had to know. I reached out, hand trembling, and touched the lower corner of the wall. It was tacky, sticky, still warm. That broke something in me. Logic dissolved into raw instinct. We needed to leave. Mark was already grabbing his pack, his voice shaking but firm. "We're gone," he said. "Now." But the woods outside waited, pitch black and silent. It's strange how even the thought of stepping into that darkness felt worse than staying with those words. The forest didn't feel like a place anymore, like something awake, watching, listening. We tried to reason our way out of fear. Maybe it was some local prank. Maybe someone had been living out there and wanted to scare off outsiders. We built stories to cover the holes in our courage. But none of those stories explained how the writing appeared inside a locked room or why the handprint was too small. A child's hand, not a grown one. At 5:09 a.m., I looked at my watch. The time seared itself into my mind because that's when the knocking returned. But it wasn't from the walls this time. It came from inside the chimney. 3 hollow knocks, slow, deliberate, echoing through the iron stove like a heartbeat. We all froze. Sarah's hand found mine and she whispered, "Don't look." But I did. The lantern flickered, once, twice, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed the cabin, the kind of darkness you can feel pressing against your eyes. I heard the soft scrape of something moving near the hearth, followed by the faintest breath. Not ours. I don't know how long we stood there paralyzed. Then a sudden gust rushed through the room, slamming the windows open, scattering ash from the fireplace across the floor. The cold that followed wasn't natural. It cut straight through the room like a blade. We stumbled outside, barefoot, half-dressed, clutching our bags. The air was wet, thick with fog, the trees barely visible. We didn't run, not yet. We just stood there, staring at that cabin. And then, through the mist, light flickered inside. A pale, reddish glow moving from room to room. We didn't wait to see what it was. We started running. The woods swallowed us whole. Branches tore at our clothes, mud sucked at our feet, but we kept going. The trail we'd come in on was gone. Every direction looked the same. Mark shouted for us to stick together, but his voice was swallowed by the fog. I remember calling his name over and over and hearing it bounce back, faint and wrong, like someone else was repeating it. When we finally broke through the tree line into the clearing where our cars were parked, dawn was just beginning to burn through the mist. We didn't speak. We didn't even check to see if everyone was there until we were halfway down the mountain. That's when we realized one of us, Jenna, hadn't made it out. Mark turned the car around, but I stopped him. Something deep inside told me that if we went back, none of us would leave again. We drove straight to the ranger station. This trying to explain through cracked voices what had happened. The ranger listened quietly, his face unreadable. When we mentioned the cabin, his eyes darkened. He said, "That cabin's been closed for years. No one's supposed to be up there." We argued, insisted we'd rented it through a listing online. But when they checked, there was no record of it. No owner, no rental, nothing. Just an old listing from nearly a decade ago, one that had been removed after an incident. He wouldn't tell us what incident, only that they'd found something written on the walls back then, too. They sent a search team for Jenna. We waited all day, pacing, not speaking much. Around sunset, one of the rangers returned. His face was pale. He said they'd found the cabin, but not how we'd left it. The writing was gone, the walls were clean, and there were no signs anyone had been there for years. But in the clearing behind it, in the dirt, they found one thing. A single handprint. Small, red, fresh. They never found Jenna. Weeks passed. We stopped talking about it, but it followed us. Mark started waking up at night, swearing he heard tapping in his walls. Sarah moved out of her apartment because she said the windows kept opening by themselves. As for me, I stopped camping. I stopped going near the woods, but no matter how far I moved from that place, that cabin followed me. Not in dreams, but in moments. The quiet ones. The ones right before dawn when the world holds its breath. Sometimes I wake up at exactly 5:09 a.m. Every time I hear it again, 3 soft knocks, like something testing the edges of my walls. And sometimes I swear I hear a small voice whisper from the dark, "Why did you come back?" And maybe it's not asking about the cabin. Maybe it's asking about the woods themselves, about the way we keep trying to claim what was never ours. The forest isn't ours to conquer. It remembers. It watches. And sometimes when we forget that, it reminds us in the only language it knows: fear, silence, and the red writing of its warnings. Because out there, deep in the Smoky Mountains, not everything lost stays gone. Some things wait. Some things remember the names of those who disturbed their rest. And if you ever find yourself on a misty trail before sunrise, listening to the woods breathe, just remember, it's not the dark you should be afraid of. It's what's listening inside it. Fear, I've come to learn, isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's the only voice in the forest that's honest with you. That weekend in the Smoky Mountains taught me something I didn't understand until much later. Fear isn't meant to paralyze you. It's meant to warn you. It's the forest's way of speaking when words don't work. It's how the mountains remind you that they are alive, older than us, and that they have seen too much to take our presence lightly. When I finally returned home, I didn't sleep for days. Every creak in the floor sounded like those taps. Every gust of wind that brushed the window carried that same heavy silence. I told myself it was trauma, exhaustion, imagination, but deep down, I knew that something from those woods had followed me. Not in the way people think, not a ghost or a curse, but a memory that doesn't let go. The kind that changes the way you see the world forever. I tried to rationalize it. I read about the cabin, about missing hikers, about folklore in the Smokies. There are whispers among locals, stories of a woman who vanished there decades ago, her child never found. Some say the blood writing appeared first after her disappearance. Others claim the cabin stands on land once sacred to the Cherokee, a place meant to be left untouched. But no one could tell me why the message, "Stay where the woods end," appeared and then changed. It took me years to understand it wasn't just a warning to stay away. It was a command to respect the boundary. The woods end where the wild begins. Beyond that line, you aren't a camper or an explorer anymore. You're a trespasser. And some places, no matter how breathtaking, are meant to be left alone. Sometimes people ask me why I still tell these stories, why I relive what happened that night. The answer is simple: because silence is dangerous. People go into those woods every weekend thinking nature is gentle, predictable, Instagram-worthy. They pack their tents and cameras but forget their humility. They forget that fear has purpose. It keeps you alert. It keeps you alive. If I could go back to that cabin, I wouldn't. But I wouldn't erase it either. That fear carved something into me deeper than the writing on those walls. It reminded me that being human in nature isn't about control, it's about coexistence. The forest doesn't owe us safety. It doesn't bend to our plans. It tests us, humbles us, and sometimes, if we're lucky, lets us leave. And to the ones who never left, the ones whose footprints fade into the soil, whose names are whispered by wind through branches, maybe they were taken not out of cruelty, but as a reminder to the rest of us that these mountains, these endless woods, are alive in ways we'll never fully understand. Every time I step near the tree line now, I pause. I listen, not just for danger, but for acknowledgement, a quiet understanding between me and the forest. A truce, maybe. I never camp without offering silence first, a few seconds of stillness, like a prayer, because sometimes respect is the only thing that keeps the forest's stories from becoming your own. And if you ever find yourself deep in the Smokies, when the mist hangs low and the world feels suspended between night and morning, remember this. When you hear tapping, don't answer. When you see writing where there should be none, don't touch it. When the forest feels aware of you, don't challenge it. Just listen. Step back. Leave quietly. Because the mountains are ancient, older than memory, older than the names we gave them, and they do not forget. The truth is, we never really escaped that cabin. It's still there in our minds, like frozen at 5 and 9 a.m., waiting. The walls may be gone, the writing may have faded, but the warning remains, carved into the hearts of those who dared to ignore it. And now, whenever I tell this story, I can almost hear the wind shift, as if something old and unseen is listening. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's a reminder, or maybe it's that same soft voice that once whispered from the doorway, reminding me of the rule I broke. Stay where the woods end, because the forest doesn't take kindly to those who come back. Every story that comes out of the mountains leaves behind a trace, a breath, a whisper, something that lingers long after the sound fades. This one, though, it never truly ended. Because every time I think back to that night, I still feel the mountain watching. Not with anger, but with an old, tired patience, the kind that comes from centuries of enduring what we humans never learned to respect. People go into those woods chasing peace. They think silence means safety, that solitude means control. But silence can hide things, and solitude can expose you. Out there, when the fire dies and the dark presses close, you start to hear the truth, that the forest doesn't care if you're brave or afraid. It only cares if you listen. That's the part most people miss. Nature doesn't speak in words, it speaks in patterns. In the sudden quiet of birds, the chill that comes without wind, the way your gut tightens for no reason at all. Those are the warnings. The blood writing, the footsteps, the missing voices. They're not the beginning of the story. They're the consequence of ignoring what came before. When I tell this story now, I don't do it to scare campers away. I do it to remind them that fear has value. It's the sound of your instincts whispering truth before your mind catches up. Fear is the forest's language translated into your bones. And when you stop listening to it, that's when things go wrong. Sometimes I wonder what the woods wanted that night. Was it revenge or just recognition? Maybe that writing on the wall wasn't a curse. Maybe it was a boundary line, a message written by something ancient, protecting what's left of its world from ours. I think about Jenna often, about how she vanished into those trees without a sound. Maybe she found peace out there, became part of the whispering that drifts through the pines at dawn. Or maybe she was claimed, like a debt that had gone unpaid for too long. Either way, her name is part of the forest now. Every time I hear that wind move through the ridges, it feels like it's carrying her voice. And maybe that's the final lesson the mountain gave us. You can't conquer what doesn't belong to you. You can only visit and hope the land allows it. Because the forest remembers every fire we light, every footprint we leave, every echo of our laughter that fades before sunrise. So, if you ever find yourself deep in the Smoky Mountains when the fog creeps low and the woods seem to breathe with you, stop for a moment. Let the quiet settle. Look around and understand. You are a guest here. A brief, fragile heartbeat in a place that's been alive long before your name meant anything. Respect the silence, respect the fear, And most of all, stay where the woods end. Because once you cross that invisible line, the one between safety and something older than understanding, you may find yourself staring at a wall that wasn't there before, covered in words written in red, asking the only question that ever mattered: why did you come back? The forest doesn't forget. The mountains don't forgive, but they do teach, in whispers, in silence, in fear. And if you're lucky, you walk away with a story instead of a scar. The air was colder than the forecast promised. I remember that clearly. It was the kind of cold that didn't just sting your fingers or bite your cheeks. It found its way into your lungs and stayed there like something alive. My name's Ethan Cole. I'm 32, and I've hiked alone more times than I can count. But the trail up Mount Mitchell that evening felt different from the start. There was something wrong with the silence. No wind through the trees, no scatter of birds before the coming dusk. Just that heavy, unmoving quiet that makes you feel like the mountain is holding its breath. I'd been on the trail since late morning, cutting through the hardwoods that climb the western slope. My plan was simple: reach the ridge, make camp before sunset, spend the night under the stars. That was it. I'd done it before. But I misjudged the light. The clouds rolled in early, thick as smoke, and by 6:30, the woods had turned to a deep, bluish haze. I should have stopped earlier, should have pitched the tent. Instead, I kept walking, thinking maybe, just maybe, I'd find one of those old ranger cabins rumored to sit along the upper trail. Most of them were built in the 50s, long abandoned, now used only by rangers in emergencies. It was almost dark when I saw it, the faint orange flicker through the trees. At first, I thought it was the sunset breaking through the fog, but as I stepped closer, I saw the light dancing against the trunks, and my heart kicked up. A fire. A campfire, maybe, or someone's lantern. Out here, that's rare. There are stretches of this mountain where you can hike 2 days without seeing another soul. And yet, through the drifting mist, I could see the outline of a small cabin, one I hadn't seen on any map. The door hung slightly ajar. The fire inside burned low but steady, its light spilling onto the porch. The smoke curled upward through a cracked chimney, and that smell, dry oak and faint cedar, filled the air. It should have been comforting, but it wasn't. There were no voices, no movement, no packs or boots by the door. Just that fire, alive and stubborn, as if someone had fed it only minutes before I arrived. I called out once. "Hello?" My voice came out softer than I meant it to. It didn't echo. It just disappeared into the fog, swallowed whole. Nothing answered. I stepped onto the porch, my boots creaking on the old planks. The wood was damp from the mountain air, slick under my hands. The doorknob was warm. That was the first thing that made me hesitate. Warm, as if someone had just turned it. Inside, the place was small, a single room, wood walls blackened by years of smoke, an iron stove in the corner with the fire glowing from within, a cot by the far wall, a small table, one chair, but no people, no sound, just that low crackle, the faint pop of burning sap. There was a coffee mug on the table, half full, steam still rising from it. For a moment, I thought maybe someone had gone outside. Maybe they were collecting firewood or getting water from the creek, but I didn't see footprints in the fresh mud by the door, none leading in, none leading out. I checked the ground twice, my headlamp sweeping over the dirt. Nothing. That's when the unease started to settle in. It wasn't fear, not yet, just the slow realization that something didn't add up. I walked over to the mug. It was chipped at the rim. The liquid inside had that faint, bitter smell of black coffee, still warm enough to send curls of steam into the air. I lifted it, felt the heat against my palm. Whoever was here couldn't have left more than a few minutes ago. But where would they have gone with no light, no sound, and no trail to follow? The wind outside began to rise then, whistling through the gaps in the old wood. The fire sputtered. I felt that odd instinct, the kind you can't explain, to leave things exactly as they were. I set the mug down, stepped back toward the door, and listened. The woods had changed. There was movement now. Not the kind that feels alive, but the kind that feels aware, a faint crunch in the leaves beyond the porch. Then another, closer this time. Slow, deliberate. "Hey," I called out again, louder. "You out there?" No answer. Just that same crunch, fading toward the trees. I stepped outside, my flashlight beam slicing through the fog. The trail behind the cabin disappeared into darkness after 10 feet. I couldn't see the source of the noise, only the shifting mist between the trees. But there, about 20 yards ahead, something caught the light. A reflection, small, metallic, glinting like glass. I moved closer, careful, heart thudding so hard I could feel it in my throat. It was a tin cup, half buried in the mud. Fresh mud. Someone had dropped it not long ago. I bent to pick it up, and that's when I heard it. The cabin door creaked shut behind me. I turned fast. The door was closed tight. The firelight inside now dim, barely visible through the cracks in the wood. I hadn't closed it. I know I hadn't. For a long moment, I just stood there, the fog pressing in like a living thing, the forest watching. Every instinct in me said to leave, but another part, the stubborn, curious part that gets hikers in trouble, said, stay calm. Check. See. I stepped back up to the porch, my hand hovering over the latch. My pulse was quick. I pushed it open slowly. The fire was still burning. But the mug on the table, it was empty. That's when fear finally came, sharp and heavy, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your breath turn shallow. I didn't run, not yet. I backed out of the cabin one slow step at a time, never turning my back on that fire. I could feel the heat of it even as I reached the tree line again. The wind picked up harder now, carrying with it a faint, hollow sound, like a low whistle, distant, then gone. I found the trail again and started down fast, my flashlight bouncing on the path. I didn't look back, not once. But as I reached the bend below the ridge, I glanced at my watch, 6:34 p.m. The light on the horizon had turned red, and behind me, through the trees, I could still see the faint orange glow of that fire, steady, alive, untouched. It followed me for another mile, that light. Each time I stopped to catch my breath, I could see it flickering behind the tree line, as if the cabin itself was moving closer, or the fire refusing to die. It wasn't until I reached the forest road that the glow finally disappeared, swallowed by the dark. I didn't report it to the rangers that night. I told myself I was just tired, cold, imagining things. But the next morning, when I came back with daylight and a clearer head, the spot where I thought the cabin had been, there was nothing. No structure, no ashes, not even a clearing large enough to fit one. Only the faint charred circle of earth where something had once burned. And sitting in the center of that circle, half buried in soot, was a chipped coffee mug. I stood there for a long time, staring at that mug. The morning light cut through the trees, thin and cold, and the air felt heavy with dew. It wasn't fear I felt then, not the sharp kind that jolts you awake, but a slower, heavier unease, the kind that sits in your chest and makes everything too quiet. I knelt down, brushed away the ash, and picked it up. It was still warm. Not hot, just warm enough that the chill of the air didn't claim it. I turned it over in my hand, searching for a name, a marking, anything. There was nothing. Just that same small chip on the rim I'd seen the night before. Something about that detail, the chipped edge, the warmth, the impossible familiarity of it, did something strange to me. I looked around, scanning for footprints again, for signs that anyone had been there at all. The ground was soft but undisturbed. No drag marks, no steps, no signs of a fire being built, just black soil and silence. That's when it hit me. The coffee hadn't smelled like old grounds. It hadn't had the sharp bite of something burned overnight. It had smelled fresh, as if someone or something wanted me to find it exactly as I did. I don't scare easily. You don't hike alone for years and flinch at every sound. But there was something about that morning, that spot, that made me feel smaller than I've ever felt in my life. Like I had stumbled into a memory that didn't belong to me, and the mountain wasn't ready to give it back. I packed up fast and started down the ridge. The fog had lifted and the forest was brighter now, every branch glistening with moisture. But as I moved, I kept catching glimpses of something that didn't fit, a flicker of light between the trees like sun glinting off glass. Once, I swore I saw smoke curling up through the pines just for a second before it vanished again. Every step down felt heavier than the one before. not from exhaustion, but from the feeling that I was leaving something unfinished behind. I kept replaying the night in my head, the fire, the door closing, the empty mug, the way the silence had shape, like someone was standing just out of sight. When I reached the ranger station at the base, I finally told one of them what I'd seen. The man behind the desk looked up from his paperwork, a weathered face, eyes like stone. He didn't seem surprised. He didn't even ask me to describe it. He just asked one question. Was the fire still burning when you got there? I nodded. Yeah, it was strong. Someone had he cut me off, and it was at dusk, about 6:30. He leaned back in his chair, staring past me toward the window. We've had a few reports like that over the years. Same area, always near sundown. I waited for him to elaborate, but didn't. Just scribbled something on a pad and muttered, "You're lucky you left when you did." Lucky? I asked. What happens if you stay? He looked up then, and there was something in his expression that made my stomach twist. Nobody knows, he said quietly. Nobody's ever stayed long enough to tell. He told me that decades ago, back when the fire towers were still manned, a small ranger outpost stood near that ridge, burned down one winter night. No one ever found out how it started. But hikers, hunters, and locals still spoke of seeing the ridge light some evenings, a faint orange glow in the trees where no trail leads. He said it's like the mountain remembers the fire and keeps replaying it, trying to finish something it never could. I wanted to laugh it off. Ghost stories, mountain folklore, every region has them. But deep down, I knew what I saw. And it wasn't just smoke or reflection. It was too deliberate, too alive. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of that cabin wouldn't leave me. The way the firelight had pulsed against the walls, the way the warmth had lingered on the doorknob like a heartbeat, the way I'd felt not alone, but watched, not threatened, but chosen. I started thinking about what it means to wander into places you don't belong. Every hiker romanticizes solitude, being alone with nature, away from everything human. But solitude has two sides. There's the peace that clears your mind, and then there's the silence that waits to see how long before it breaks you. Out there, the line between peace and fear is thinner than bark. You start to realize that maybe some places were never meant to be found, that the mountain, the forest, the fog, they all keep their own secrets. They don't always want witnesses. And yet there's a strange beauty in that realization. The idea that the wilderness isn't just empty space, it's alive, layered with memories, echoes, and stories that never stop breathing. The fire that burned in that cabin wasn't just a ghost, it was a reminder. A reminder that even in isolation, you're never truly alone. The woods remember, the mountain watches, the earth keeps its records in ways we'll never understand. I returned to Mount Mitchell once more, months later, against my better judgment. It was spring this time, the air warmer, the trail clear. I told myself I wasn't going to look for the cabin, but I knew that's exactly what I was doing. I retraced every step past the streams, the switchbacks, up toward the ridge, and when I reached the spot again, I stopped. No fire, no scent of smoke, no sign of anything human, just the wind moving through the trees. But as I stood there, the light shifted, soft gold through the canopy, and for the briefest moment, I saw it again. The faint outline of a cabin door, the shape of a chimney, then gone. Like the mountain was letting me know, I remember you too. I don't know what the truth is. I don't think I ever will. But I do know this, there's something sacred about mystery, something necessary. We're drawn to it because it humbles us, reminds us that not everything is meant to be conquered or understood. When you walk alone into the deep woods, you're not just facing the wild. You're facing every part of yourself that hides in the noise of the world. Fear, curiosity, memory. And sometimes what you find out there isn't what's waiting in the trees, it's what's been waiting inside you all along. Every time I set foot on a new trail now, I take a moment to listen, to the silence, the air, the pulse of the ground beneath me. Because out there, somewhere between the living and the forgotten, the mountain keeps its fire burning. And if you ever find yourself hiking near Mount Mitchell around 6:34 p.m. and you see a faint orange glow through the fog, don't go looking for it. Some flames aren't meant to warm you. Some are meant to remind you just how small your light really is.